The sun had barely risen over the Virginia countryside in 1863 when whispers began. They said a man was missing, slaves vanishing without a trace. Families spoke in hushed tones, fear lodged in the spaces between their words. This was no ordinary disappearance. A shadow moved through the forests, unseen but watched. The slave hunters believed he was just another runaway. But what they didn't know, what no one dared whisper, was that the man they sought was not only free, he was something else entirely, something deadly. And he had learned the art of silence in the most unforgiving classrooms of oppression. In the early hours, the hunters scoured plantations and churches alike. The scent of smoke and iron hung heavy over the fields, the air thick with tension, and yet the man remained unseen. There were no footprints, no cries, no signs that anyone had ever been there. Only the feeling, an oppressive, unnatural pressure, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. He watched them, calculating, waiting, understanding the hunter as deeply as they understood the prey. This story is not merely about pursuit or escape. It is about the unbearable weight of what was hidden, the dark, systemic hunger of a nation built on chains. It is about the invisible man who became a force of reckoning, whose knowledge of the land, of weapons, and of human nature would make him the deadliest marksman the Civil War had ever seen. And yet, in the shadows of history, he was almost forgotten. He was born into chains, yet even as a child, he was aware of every secret the world tried to hide. His mother whispered warnings by candlelight. Never trust the light, it blinds more than it reveals. His father, a man of silent wisdom, taught him the geometry of escape, paths through fields, rivers that never betrayed, shadows that spoke in silence. By the age of 10, he could dismantle a lock faster than any overseer could blink. By 12, he had memorized the patterns of patrols, the names of hunters, and even the whispers of the plantation church. Every day was a lesson in survival, every night a study in observation. The world that sought to break him, enslave him, became instead a tutor, sharpening his mind, his senses, and his resolve. The local minister, a man of oppressive influence, believed faith could erase sin and sin's consequences alike. Yet in the eyes of this boy, faith was a veil, a tool wielded to control, manipulate, and blind those who sought freedom. He watched the sermons, memorized the steps of the hymns, and listened to the creaking floorboards as the congregation kneeled and whispered their secrets. By the time the Civil War began, he was no longer just a boy. He was a shadow, a force unseen, a mind that could predict the movements of men as if reading the ink of their souls. The first shot was whispered about in the town long after it happened. No one knew exactly who fired, or even from where. But a hunter, a man notorious for cruelty, was found at dawn, his body slumped against the roots of an ancient oak. The shot had come from impossibly far, yet precisely, his heart the target, his body a message. It was not vengeance that drove him, nor was it impulse. Each act was calculated, deliberate, a testament to a mind refined under oppression. He had studied the mechanics of every rifle, every musket, every hidden angle that could transform fear into silence. From the shadows, he had learned to bend time and space, to manipulate the chaos of war into a tool, a weapon, a godlike power of control over life and death. The plantation owners and hunters believed themselves cunning, their pride shielding them from the truth, that the hunted could become predator, that the invisible could govern reality. Letters arrived at their homes, and signed threats that hinted at knowledge impossible for a slave to possess. Yet the truth was simple. He had learned too well, and the system that enslaved him could not foresee the mind it had cultivated in secrecy. The slave hunters did not understand fear until it found them in the forests of Virginia. Days turned into nights without rest. Food became scarce, morale shattered by the unseen presence that toyed with them. Trees seemed to shift. Paths they had memorized led them astray. Whispers carried across the wind, mocking their ignorance. Every hunter began to see shadows where there were none, to hear cries that vanished when approached. The invisible sniper became a psychological tormentor, turning their own fear into a weapon. Letters and rumors of impossible shots, the precision, the control, spread among them, fracturing their unity. Some believed the man was not human, but a demon sent to punish the greedy and cruel. And perhaps, in some way he was not supernatural, but born from centuries of suppressed rage, learned through meticulous observation, and executed with a cold, relentless mind. He was the ghost of history, the shadow the country refused to recognize. For every hunter that fell, the legend grew. And in the hearts of those who survived, fear became a permanent scar, a whispered memory that would outlive their bones. He moved silently between towns, leaving chaos in his wake. Churches whispered about divine punishment. Families vanished from homes without explanation. Yet to the outside world, life continued as normal. Markets opened, hymns were sung, and the machinery of oppression carried on. The man had learned the power of symbols, the weight of narrative. A fallen hunter in one town became a cautionary tale in the next. He turned local legends into weapons, creating panic without appearing, controlling through fear alone. Shadows elongated unnaturally. The air smelled of iron and ash before anyone discovered the horror. The townspeople's minds began to fracture under the pressure of knowing yet not knowing. Doors locked, windows barred, yet the disappearance of a family here, a hunter there, eroded their certainty. Every detail of life, the sound of a bell, the rhythm of a market day, the structure of the church itself, was distorted by his unseen hand. By turning the ordinary into instruments of terror, he forced the world to acknowledge his presence without ever revealing himself. In his mind, he drew a map no one else could read. It was a lattice of escape routes, sniper positions, and human weakness. Rivers were lines of logic, trees were guides, the wind was a messenger. This map became his sanctuary, his weapon, and his prison, binding him to the very land that had enslaved him. The hunters tried to understand it, tracing paths through fields, over rivers, across swamps. Each attempt led to failure, their bodies scattered in ways that seemed almost ritualistic. The map of shadows was not just geography, it was psychology, strategy, and history fused into one. It was the culmination of a lifetime of learning from oppression, cruelty, and observation, and it made him untouchable. Even soldiers passing through the region felt the unease. Rumors of a black marksman, invisible in the forests, spread. Yet they dismissed them as superstition. They could not conceive that a single man, trained in patience, survival, and vengeance, could manipulate an entire landscape, an entire human network, into submission without ever revealing his location. In the heart of one small Virginian town, the church became an altar of terror. Its steeple cast long shadows over graves that no one visited, and inside, sermons echoed with fear the congregation could not name. He observed from the periphery, learning not just the patrols and paths, but the secrets whispered in prayer. Faith, he realized, was often less about salvation than obedience, less about comfort than control. Families who once trusted in the church began to vanish without explanation. Fathers in the fields, children on the edge of town, entire households swallowed by silence. The ministers claimed these were tests of faith, punishments for sin, but the man understood the truth. Institutions were blind to their own corruption, and every rule imposed to maintain order could be weaponized by someone who saw the hidden patterns. He left marks only he understood, symbols carved into pews, stones, and doors, clues that hinted at justice to some and madness to others. The invisible sniper was no longer merely surviving. He was rewriting the map of fear, using faith as both shield and sword. Every bell toll, every whispered hymn became part of a network of psychological warfare that neither hunters nor townspeople could resist. He was everywhere and nowhere, a shadow moving in sacred spaces, challenging the very foundations of belief. By the fall of 1863, hunters began receiving letters, carefully composed and signed, written with precision. They described their failures before they happened, predicted patrols, mocked their ignorance. Some thought they were the ramblings of a madman. Others whispered about demons or ghosts sent to punish them. The letters were more than threats. They were lessons in power, control, and terror. He had learned to manipulate perception, to bend the mind without a single confrontation. Families that ignored the warnings found themselves vanished, their homes empty, doors wide open as if they had never existed. Each word on paper carried weight, designed to fracture trust, isolate the hunter, and amplify fear. Historians would later call such psychological strategies unrealistic. Yet for months, the countryside became a theater of horror. Hunters began to doubt each other, to turn on one another. The man's unseen hand orchestrated chaos, leaving only one certainty. He was always one step ahead. Every whispered rumor, every shadow along a forest path, was part of a narrative he alone authored, a narrative that would become legend, though history would try to bury it. In nearby towns, orphanages became extensions of his map, strange places where the lost, the silenced, and the hidden congregated. The children, unaware of the sniper's presence, absorbed lessons of fear, vigilance, and survival. He used them as observers, teaching without instruction, influencing without contact. The orphanage walls became a canvas of terror. Footsteps echoed when none should exist. Doors slammed, shadows stretched impossibly. Yet to the children, these were lessons of subtlety, patterns of life and death they would later carry into adulthood. The man understood that survival depended not just on skill but on knowledge, knowledge of the unseen, of the unspoken, of the unrecorded. Hunters sometimes discovered orphanages with nothing left inside but silence. Their inhabitants vanished, leaving rooms perfectly arranged as if a human hand had folded reality itself. He was meticulous, not chaotic. Every disappearance was precise, deliberate, and symbolic, a psychological message that terror could be taught, hidden, and enforced without being seen. Even the seminaries, bastions of structured morality, could not escape him. Young men training for the clergy were confronted by whispers, shadows, and signs that shook their faith. They claimed to see him in the peripheries of their vision, a dark figure observing, calculating, immortal in presence but human in form. He understood the architecture of fear, the way a vaulted ceiling could amplify the sound of footsteps, how candlelight could exaggerate shadows, how belief could distort perception. It was not merely survival. It was education in horror, training men to see that control existed even in institutions dedicated to morality. Letters arrived, carved symbols appeared on confessionals, and some seminaries recorded unexplained disappearances. The sniper's work had grown beyond revenge. He was now an invisible force of reckoning, one that exposed the hypocrisy, corruption, and cruelty of systems designed to suppress freedom while claiming righteousness. By 1864, the hunters grew desperate. Their numbers dwindled, their strategies failed. What they believed was a hunt had become a descent into chaos, a psychological disintegration orchestrated by a single mind. They set traps, spread false information, and coordinated patrols, but nothing could predict him. He anticipated patterns, exploited weaknesses, and controlled the very land they traversed. Even nature seemed to conspire. Storms obscured paths, rivers shifted course, and wind carried whispers that unnerved even the most seasoned trackers. Hunters began turning on one another. Trust became impossible. Rumors spread that the sniper could vanish into thin air, that he was not a man but a shadow of vengeance. History would remember some hunters as lost to the war, but the truth is darker. They were lost to the unseen hand of the deadliest sniper, whose presence was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Families connected to the hunters became targets as well. The man understood lineage, generational patterns, and the inherited privileges of cruelty. Plantations passed from father to son. Men who had never seen him were suddenly victims of his precision. Letters and threats were now intergenerational, predicting actions decades before they occurred. Some families abandoned their homes, while others disappeared entirely. Rumors claimed a shadowy figure was teaching vengeance like a legacy, using both fear and knowledge to rewrite family histories. The sniper's mind was a labyrinth of patience, observation, and ruthless justice. He understood that cruelty perpetuated itself through bloodlines, that fear could teach lessons faster than punishment, and that invisibility allowed him to strike with impunity. Forests became his dominion. Trees whispered secrets, paths shifted subtly, and hunters who thought they knew the land were misled. He used sound, light, and terrain as extensions of his consciousness. Many believed the forest haunted, locals called it cursed. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He had mastered it. Every branch, every river, Every shadow was a tool. He became part of the landscape, a predator whose intelligence exceeded any natural measure. Hunters feared the wind itself, knowing it could carry warnings, death, or misdirection orchestrated entirely by him. By now, fear itself had become his weapon. Hunters hallucinated, townsfolk whispered of curses, and soldiers in passing regiments felt the presence of a ghostly marksman. Letters, symbols, shadows, all were extensions of his mind. Psychologists today might call it manipulation or early understanding of cognitive terror. For those living it, it was incomprehensible, unnatural, and relentless. He taught everyone who crossed his path one lesson. Invisibility amplifies power, knowledge is freedom, and the mind can be sharper than any blade. He moved between Union and Confederate lines, striking impossible targets, disappearing before any pursuit could begin. Soldiers on both sides whispered of a black marksman whose bullets seemed guided by fate itself. He became a legend in real time, yet history buried him as myth, as rumor, as exaggeration. Each strike was surgical, precise, symbolic. He exposed the brutality of war and the hypocrisies of both sides, forcing them to confront the limits of control and human understanding. His campaign was not only survival but revelation, an illumination of hidden truths buried under violence, politics, and oppression. Orphans, children, townspeople, even soldiers learned from him without ever seeing him. Patterns of survival, reading human behavior, and understanding fear became lessons passed on silently. He was a mentor of invisibility, a guide through the landscape of horror. Some say the legacy he left shaped communities for generations. Knowledge of the unseen, of patterns, of vigilance became survival tools. Yet this education came at a cost, a lifelong awareness that someone, or something, was always watching, always calculating. Newspapers occasionally reported miraculous deaths of hunters, citing strange accidents or sudden disappearances. Few understood that these were not miracles, but calculations of a mind perfected under oppression. The invisible sniper manipulated perception, controlling both events and the narrative. To the outside world, history ignored him. To those living it, his existence was a daily terror, a reminder of the invisible forces governing human action. Hunters attempted one last coordinated strike in late 1864, setting traps across miles of forest. Yet he predicted, adapted, and struck. Each hunter fell exactly where he wanted, as if guided by unseen hands. It was not cruelty for its own sake. It was precision, justice, and the assertion of a mind unchained. The forests echoed with silence after the final confrontation, leaving behind only a legend too horrifying to record fully. By the war's end, he vanished entirely. No trace remained, no burial, no records, only whispers. Townsfolk reported strange sightings decades later, a shadow crossing a field, a precise shot in the distance. Historians dismissed the stories as folklore, but the truth persisted. He existed, fought, and vanished without leaving evidence. The deadliest Union sniper was never credited, his existence hidden by fear, prejudice, and history's selective memory. Today, the forests still hold whispers, and descendants speak of a shadow that taught survival, vengeance, and the power of observation. Institutions, towns, and families still carry the echoes of his presence. The story is not merely about a man hunting hunters. It is about knowledge suppressed, fear weaponized, and the ways invisible forces shape human history. The sniper reminds us that even in chains, the mind can become unbound. The invisible can govern reality, and the stories we forget are often the ones most powerful.